the idea that the Israelis killed him, like at first glance, I'm like, he was their closest ally. Like he was their top guy. They didn't kill their top guy. You know, who could have done this? Who could have possibly done this? And then when you look at the evidence, it's like, well, there isn't really a lot that's weird about it. Well, you know, MLK Jr. was shot with a 30-06, and the same thing happened. He got shot in the face, and it lodged in his shoulder.
Nick Fuentes just insisted that there was no conspiracy behind the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And in this clip with Bradley Martin, he explains why he believes that, what this says about the FBI's narrative, and why so many people have brought up various theories to explain his murder. Let's watch, and please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
And then as soon as he passed, like the first messaging around his passing was like, he's, you know, Netanyahu's tweeting like he stood as a, you know, a lion for Israel. It's like, why are we, whether or not like they did it or not, any of this, it's like they went and they turned his death into this like moment for Israel.
Right.
And so when I saw that, I was like, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And you didn't see it that way.
No, not at all. And I guess certainly my point of view on this is colored by the fact that I had a rivalry with Charlie Kirk for many years. Not even a rivalry, like a straight up feud. We were in a war. And the center of it is that we were critical, and by we, I mean me and all my followers were heavily critical of him for supporting Israel. He was pro-Israel his entire career.
Yeah.
From 2012 until 2025. And that was really like, he did a show in August, a month before his passing, and said Nick Fuentes is a reprehensible, vile anti-Semite. He was like texting Dinesh D'Souza, don't talk to this guy. We've been fighting this guy for 10 years. He's filth, blah, blah. Like he hated me, called me vermin. And so the idea that the Israelis killed him, like at first glance, I'm like, he was their closest ally. Like he was their top guy. They didn't kill their top guy. It also was all circumstantial. Me, I'm willing to believe anything if it's based in evidence and reality. And I just saw no evidence.
All right, on this, a few things to push back at. It's just undeniable that Netanyahu lionized this guy, said he was the most pro-Israel, devout stalwart to the end, essentially, and in two separate media appearances in English, appeared on cable news and swore that he did not kill Charlie Kirk and that Charlie Kirk was his friend. We know from correspondence that Charlie Kirk actually drafted and wrote a letter to Netanyahu, essentially saying, hey, we're getting our asses handed to us on this Hasbara narrative on campuses. And I'm sick of being the middleman on it. You need a better narrative to dissuade these young people from believing it was a genocide, which it was, by the way. And no, he was not their top guy or nowhere close to it, especially toward the end of his life. There's lots of evidence that he was turning his back on being so devoutly pro-Israel. You can watch the August 6th episode of the Megyn Kelly show to see that. He airs his frustrations that people are accusing him of being disloyal for raising minor criticisms of Israel. And we know from Candace Owens' revelations 2 days before his death, he texted, I have no choice but to leave the pro-Israel cause, in a group filled with some people that continued to lie about how rigidly pro-Zionist he was. He did turn his back on Israel. He wasn't their top guy. And for Nick, despite whatever beliefs he had about Charlie Kirk, just because Charlie Kirk called him vermin doesn't mean that Charlie himself wasn't changing his mind on Israel, because he so clearly was.
Initially, I was willing to believe a conspiracy because we had no idea what took place. He got shot, and that's all we knew. And so initially I was thinking, is this a tactical force? Like, was this a professional hit? Are there going to be other hits? Is this one attack, or is it going to be like a series of attacks? But then the guy turned himself in, and we found out this was no professional job. There was no security there. They had 3,000 people, no security perimeter, no checkpoint. They didn't check IDs, tickets, nothing. It was wide open. So that's one. Two, the rooftop where the guy positioned himself, the shooter, whoever it was accessible by a civilian, a pedestrian walkway. So it's not like Thomas Crook's where you had to bring a ladder and set it up and climb up. You walk up the steps and it's accessible to any pedestrian. Then they found the murder weapon in the woods. They caught the guy in the Ring camera. And so this went from, oh, it's a professional hit job. And people would say, you're telling me that some kid went up there and took him out? It's like, well, anybody could have. There was no perimeter. Anyone could access the roof. How hard would it be if you even knew that this event was taking place to literally get a gun, walk up, take the shot, run away?
Okay, yeah, a few points on this. I actually think some of these points are pretty fair because a lot of people have raised the suspicion that this is a professional hit. They don't believe the FBI narrative, and no one should trust the FBI narrative by default by any stretch. But a lot of people have, discouraged this notion that it wasn't a professional hit. But at the same time, Nick is right. This was a pedestrian walkway. You could walk up there. There is a video of the kid jumping off. They haven't, I don't think, geometrically identified the kid, but we do have that video. But at the same time, that doesn't detract from a lot of the other things that have been brought up, including George Zinn, another guy, saying at first that he shot Charlie Kirk. And then later at the police station, he's just saying, oh no, I just said that because I was trying to help the real killer escape. Well, wouldn't that actually be more valuable to scrutinize that angle? Don't you think maybe there might be some more to that? But police seems to have let him off 6 hours later. And the 30-06 round stuck in his throat, that seems odd according to the official narrative. That doesn't really say who shot him or not, necessarily, but that's an oddity. So I have to disagree. There is some things that are odd there, regardless of who you think shot Charlie Kirk.
Anyone could have done it. That's one. And then two, then we get all this evidence. We get the text messages, we get the Ring camera, the Discord server. The guy turned himself in.
But didn't they say the Discord thing wasn't real?
Who said that?
I guess Discord itself. I didn't. Discord itself said that it wasn't. It was, these messages never existed.
Initially, Discord said the murder wasn't planned, but then they found that he left a note and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I actually did it."
Nick is right about this. Actually, there was a Discord exchange that he was in, along with Lance Twig and some other of his friends. This was divulged by Turkey Tom. Somehow Turkey Tom, the YouTuber, got a hold of this entire archive of that Discord, analyzed it, and talked about it in a video. And it's my understanding that he was actually contacted by a Fed after that. I don't know what the Fed asked for the archive or something like that. But it is true that there is a message from this archive Discord that appears to have him basically confess and say that he was going to turn himself in on the Discord. Nick's also right about the text messages, and a lot of people have raised questions about the text messages. How can they be real? How would, a young person talk this way? But that's basically the hardest thing to fake if you're the FBI, because the defense will have subpoena power. They can reach out to the provider and ask for confirmation of whether these are the texts or not. And the defense would have access to both phones in question, one from Lance Twig and one from Tyler Robinson, to be able to confirm that. So if you're saying that the feds fudged these texts, that would throw this away alone in court. If this was part of a conspiracy to frame this kid, all you'd have to do is compare the records from the subpoena power and the provider to what the feds are saying, and this kid's gonna walk. If not, it would be tough for the feds to fudge this, because they'd have to not only hack the database of the provider and all of the backups that the provider had in various databases there, plus somehow get a hold of the phones and corrupt them. And we know from other cases in the true crime community, true crimers talk about this a lot because it's come up in other cases, the messages that are sent to phones can't be retroactively changed by the providers. They're just there. Those messages themselves can't be altered by the providers later. So you'd be having to say that the feds would have had to hack the phones as well as the records. So I think that's the hardest thing to fudge, and it's really why I think Tyler Robinson was involved. I'm not closed-minded to the idea that there's a conspiracy. I think there likely probably was, but that is true too.
Also, too, even the stuff you're describing as like why it wouldn't be them, anyone could do it.
Mm-hmm.
Couldn't, if it was... again, this is conspiratorial, right? But if it was in that realm of like, it's on our own guy, then wouldn't that be the notion that you would want everyone to see? Anyone could do it. Anyone could have done it. It's that guy. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the problem is like, you could ask a ton of questions like that.
Sure.
And it could go anywhere, but we have to lead with the evidence. And the point is like, I guess people started out with the assumption that like something was off about this one. You know, who could have done this? Who could have possibly done this? And then when you look at the evidence, it's like, well, there isn't really a lot that's weird about it because there's been a lot of left-wing violence and the left is very violent. And it's totally plausible that Occam's razor would say that the suspect that turned himself in is the guy. And unless there's compelling evidence that something was strange or something was suspect or, you know, that it points in another direction, you have to say, okay, well, this is actually plausible. So
Did you see the stuff about the guy who stood up and like was like, I did it, and then that guy was from some like 9/11 thing? Like, you didn't see all that?
yeah, but I mean, even that, I mean, this is a guy that they said he was at every political event in Utah in the past 20 years. And you do have people like this. If you go to a political rally, there are these like political junkies. They're total like they're no life losers, and they go to every political thing ever, and they follow it like a groupie for a band. And he was clearly one of those types of people.
Yeah.
That's so it seems.
I agree with Nick on that. That is George Zinn's background. We've analyzed it a little bit and talked about it on this channel, but that's not to say that just because there's political junkies at events that means that you shouldn't care about the fact that someone else is claiming at first to be the shooter and then later claiming to try to do what they did to cause a distraction to allow the real shooter to escape. Not whatsoever. I mean, that's kind of crazy to say that, you know, just because he was a political junkie, and he was, you know, from all indications that I found from my research, he went to all sorts of political events around Utah, especially Republican-oriented events. But very few people that go to multiple events inject themselves into possibly being the actual killer here. And as far as left-wing violence, it's true. Some mass shooters have been left-wing. James Hodgkinson, that shot the congressional baseball game up, was a leftist. Connor Betts was a leftist. We have the Nashville trans shooter, a leftist. Doesn't necessarily mean that every shooter has to be a leftist, but the motive exists, you know, to want to shoot Charlie Kirk. Who would more want to do that? Someone on the left or the right? Generally wouldn't want to be someone on the right, not to say that the deep state wasn't involved or the feds weren't involved or some foreign power wasn't involved. It's possible, but there's at least a plausible Occam's razor motive that someone that disagreed with Charlie Kirk's political views would have done this. And it seems like both Lance Twigg and Tyler Robinson were very much opposed to Charlie Kirk. And, you know, if the text messages are real, you can say they're not real. We'll see if the defense fights that. Tyler Robinson himself says that he did this because he was too full of hate, essentially. There's also Discord messages that were released by Turkey Time that seem to corroborate this, both on the side of Lance Twigg and on the side of Tyler Robinson, though it didn't seem like from the Discord messages I saw that he was, you know, so radically, ardently leftist in the Discord itself. That is true.
And anyway, I'm willing to accept it's a conspiracy, but we just need the evidence. And I feel like Candace Owens, she's been beating this drum for 2 months now, and we're really scraping the bottom of the barrel. Now she's on Twitter saying, so there's people in maroon shirts in the audience, and there's this La Quinta hotel, and it's like, don't you think that at this point something would have turned up, somebody would have seen something, somebody would have said something? They got nothing. And so I'm willing to wait until the trial.
Yeah.
Because that's the other thing. When the prosecutors came out a week after the killing, they said something very specific. They said, we know you want the evidence. A spokesperson came out and said, but the defendant has his Fifth and Sixth Amendment rights to a speedy trial with the jury of his peers. And what they're effectively indicating was, in any murder investigation, they don't come out with all the evidence for the media because they don't try the killer in the court of public opinion. They do it in a court of law. And what that means is you need an untainted jury pool. In order for him to have a fair trial, you need a jury that doesn't think he's guilty. And so if you go out and say, here's all our evidence, here's all the state's evidence that he did it, they're not going to be able to find a jury pool that is impartial. And if you don't have an impartial jury, they could claim that it's a mistrial. So because we have an alive defendant, you really have to wait for the trial to see all the state's evidence.
Yeah.
And so I'm willing to wait for that. I'm open to a conspiracy, but I really don't think.
But do you think it's
Yeah, that's a fair point about the judicial system. That is the case. That's why there was a gag order. And to be frank, I'm against all gag orders because I think it's an affront to freedom of speech. But what the state is arguing that is, if we don't have a gag order, then so many people will learn about all this evidence that the state has against him, and he won't get a fair trial because he'll just get innately convicted. And maybe there's some plausibility to that. That's their good faith argument, if you want to call it a good faith argument. But really, not everyone pays attention to political crimes, not even in Utah, not even about Charlie Kirk, where he was shot in Utah. And you could field a jury of his peers that probably wouldn't have even heard about this case whatsoever, even if all this news was released. At the same time, that is the state's argument. I also want to make clear that, his talk about Candace Owens is like, she's exploring a lot of the angles of this case, and she feels, distraught over the loss of her friend, and this is her recourse. Now, I'm not, you can't say she's not brought anything of interest to the public in her podcast whatsoever. I happen to doubt that it can be, all of the angles can be true that she's brought up. For instance, I don't think it can be all these things simultaneously, that Turning Point USA betrayed Charlie Kirk, that Lance Twigg was involved, that it was an Egyptian military plot, that it was somehow related to Israeli cell phones on the site at the time, and that it was George Zinn as well, and that it was 3 or 4 other things of angles that she's brought up. At some point, I think, if you have a stance on this, you should pick a narrative. And it's hard for me to believe that all of those things can play into this murder. Some of them are probably red herrings. I'm not saying don't explore them, but at some point, it's hard for me to believe that it's all those things simultaneously.
Do you think it's fully the story they're telling? Because the biggest thing is the gun and the damage. They're talking about this, the bullet disappeared in his neck.
Yeah, the 30-06.
It's how is that?
Well, MLK Jr. was shot with a 30-06, and the same thing happened. He got shot in the face, and it lodged in his shoulder, and there was no exit wound, and his face didn't blow up. And so you have this is, again, it's like people that are not, and I'm not a ballistics expert either, but people go online and they go, oh, that bullet would never do that. And it's like, okay, but you don't know anything about physics, and you don't know anything about ballistics. So what are you talking? It's like, if there's expert testimony, it will be there at the trial. But it's like, again, people are just kind of taking anything they can find and using either extrapolation or, asking these kinds of rhetorical questions. And there just really isn't any hard evidence.
Okay, so he's right about the Martin Luther King assassination. That was a bullet through the face that got lodged in his, I think, neck, like Nick said. It was a 30-06 round, but I don't know if this is the best example to use, Nick, because lots of people, including King's family, believe that it was the FBI responsible for King's death in a conspiracy. And in fact, a Memphis jury in 1999 declared it so. They said that King's death was the responsibility of the FBI, who engaged in a conspiracy to kill them. And by the way, it's plainly known through documented proof that they tried to get him to commit suicide prior to his death. You can still see that note if you Google it, the note that the FBI sent to try to convince King to kill himself. So if you're saying that this has happened before because King had a similar experience with a bullet through the neck, it doesn't exactly answer that there wasn't a conspiracy behind his death. There very clearly was, at least according to this jury in Memphis. So I don't know if that's the best excuse or example to use in talking about this if you think there is no conspiracy.
Do you think then Candace is doing it just for engagement?
I think that's a huge part of it.
Yeah.
I really do. I think that, and obviously I have beef with Candace. I think that she cares that her friend died, certainly. Yeah. And you can't discount that. At the same time, this has been really good business for her.
Yeah.
After her show from the first day that she did it, after the killing, she's getting 150,000 viewers, millions of views on every show. She's probably making tons of money. At this point, I think she's milking it. It's been 3 months, and every show is, And it's like this, she's just baiting. Every day it's, this changes everything. You're not going to want to miss it. Tune in tomorrow.
Yeah.
She's also slow walking the evidence, where she's like, I have more evidence, but I'm going to wait to release it. Why?
Okay, so with this, yeah, at least Nick concedes that Candace does care about her friend, but frankly, Candace's podcast was blowing up long before she started to follow Charlie Kirk and follow, this investigation series that she's been doing. And Nick's right, that has been breaking the internet, but it's not because there's nothing there. It's because a hell of a lot of Americans and people from outside of America think that there is a lot there, that have paid attention to Candace and what she's brought up, think that there's some angle there. And this is no one's fault but the FBI. So it seems like Nick is trying to use his personal animosity with Candace to kind of criticize her on this. And she's open to criticism. She's a public figure. But at the same time, who can you blame for this, Nick? Is it Candace for bringing up alternative angles? Or is it the FBI that has lied profusely and killed people in cold blood and created psyops and entrapment schemes with the Whitmer plot on January 6th and COINTELPRO wiretapping dissidents? They murdered Fred Hampton. They burned women and children alive at Waco. They shot a woman and her child at Ruby Ridge. It's time and time again that the FBI has basically engaged in such nefarious and evil doings that how could 1 million people on Earth trust them? Especially if you're on the right and watched Russiagate unfold for 2 to 3 years in the media. And we're going to just trust the FBI narrative. It's like, no, Americans care about Candace and she's blowing up because they think there's something there. And it's plausible on face value by default because of all the lies of the FBI.
So you can milk it for ratings. If you have evidence, put it all out there.
Yeah, and I've seen you mention that a few times.
So I think, there's a fine line, and I really am willing to be charitable, even though I don't really like her, and say it's her friend, they're very close. Like, I don't think she's a horrible person. At the same time, you're an influencer, I'm an influencer. You know how it is.
I get it.
You want to have the big show. And I think that at this point, she's milking it a little bit.
Yeah. What about the whole thing about her assassination? Have you seen that? The French government's trying to kill her now?
It's like, show the evidence.
Yeah.
She says she's got the names, the paper trail. Oh, but I'm not going to show anybody. Show us the shred of evidence and we'll believe you. But at this point, she sounds totally crazy. And of course it went back to Brigitte Macron. You knew it was going there. I knew from the second that she did the show about Charlie Kirk, I'm like, it's just a matter of time before Brigitte Macron is implicated in this conspiracy.
Jesus Christ.
Okay, well, with that, she has not said that she won't provide evidence whatsoever. Nick's wrong about that. She said she has provided it to U.S. authorities, including the White House, the FBI, and the counterterrorism unit in the government. But she hasn't said, I won't give the evidence. Actually, it's funny what's happening here. What's unfolding is everyone's saying she lost her mind because she has said, based on the source she had, the source was a high-ranking official in the French government, according to her in a text. She has given that information to the feds. I don't think she trusts the feds, but there's no one to say that she won't divulge the truth if the feds do nothing. And so far, it's been crickets from the feds. The French authorities in various circles, including Élysée Palace, that is where the French family lives, have denied any association with this attempt to assassinate her. But the feds haven't weighed in. It's been crickets, and that's interesting. And I imagine if it's crickets longer, she might reveal the receipts. Just like she did, by the way, when people continued to say that Charlie Kirk went to his death as, the most rigid Zionist. Ben Shapiro did this. Netanyahu, the master manipulator, did this. People like Rob McCoy and Josh Hammer, who were privy to the message that Charlie Kirk said, I'm leaving the pro-Israel cause, did this. And then she just put egg all over their faces by unveiling the truth that he had said that he was leaving the pro-Israel cause. And by the way, not just that, but he wasn't even going to try to mend the animosities between himself and the rigid pro-Zionist donors that were down his throat. Instead, he was thinking about not only having Tucker Carlson at his December event, but also inviting Candace Owens. Not the real thing you would do to try to kind of alleviate the angers that are being caused by the Zionist donor class and the pressures against Charlie Kirk. So that's what we have here. We'll have to see how that story unfolds. I can't weigh into it. I haven't seen anything, but Candace hasn't said she's not going to provide that proof. And she may just do that just like she did with that Charlie Kirk text message. So let's keep posted on that. I do want to hear what you guys have to say. Let me know in the comments down below. Is Nick right about this? Is there more than meets the eye? What are some fair theories that cast a narrative in a different direction than the FBI's, very narrow narrative that it was another lone nut like it always is, right? Even though they went with that with Martin Luther King and JFK, you have it with Charlie Kirk, you're going to have that every time with FBI. Let me know in the comments down below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, also subscribe to Bradley Martin. Great segment, great podcast, great interview. And if you like this video and my take, please consider joining as a YouTube member. You can click the join button below. And if you do that, you'll gain immediate access to all my videos before they go live to the general public on YouTube. So you'll be able to view those members only videos right away, and I appreciate your support if you go that length to support me. Also, if you want a free copy of my first book, Compact of the Republic, click the link in the description below. It'll shoot you off to a site. Just plug in your email and I'll send that to you free of charge in PDF form. No obligation, just because I appreciate you watching the channel. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.